Several years ago, I got invited to be part of a technical committee at the level of the OECD, because the OECD was interested to start developing an assessment program on assessing social emotional skills. So I got invited to the technical advisory group there, and that was for me a very important start actually. Basically, I'm known as a scientist studying individual differences in children and the development of these differences. So this is about how personality develops in young children and also how cognitive abilities are developing across time. And so that OECD project was a very interesting one because we did not only got into contact with governments, but also with foundations. And one of the foundations around the table at that time was the Institute Ayrton Senna. So during the meetings, and especially during the breaks of the meetings, we started talking to each other. And so 1 or 2 years later, Viviane Senna organized, and the Institute organized this big meeting here in Sao Paulo in 2014, where a lot of policy people from all over the world were invited, and we got invited as technical experts. And that was, I think, a very important starting point, because before that I was exclusively working actually as a scientist. So in science we design studies, usually pretty small scale studies. I'm coming from Belgium, and so Belgium has a much smaller population than Brazil, and usually we are running the studies in our own lab, and we have more or less a limit of about 500 to 1,000 people. If we have a study with 1,000 people, that's already quite a big thing in Belgium. But here I got the opportunity through my Brazilian colleagues to actually do studies at a much larger scale. And then when that agenda came on assessing social emotional skills, and when we developed a taxonomy that was important for these social emotional skills, then we got many opportunities to work at what we would call an evidence-based level. So this is basically that you bring in science and that you actually examine how things work, that you get a deeper insight in processes, how skills affect outcomes, and so on and so forth. And at that time, I think Brazil and the policy people in Brazil were also ready to move more into the direction of working more evidence-based. Before, I think people not necessarily came from education, and all at once you become state secretary for, let's say, the state of Goiás or Rio or Sao Paulo, but not necessarily these are people with an educational background as a state secretary or with a psychology background. And because we developed this taxonomy and are interested in assessing, this is what you actually need when you want to start at an empirical basis. So I think if the resources are limited, you have not only a moral or a political obligation to invest the resources in a good way, and the good way is based on empirical data. So I think the evidence-based piece was a necessity to bring to the agenda. And at the same time, I think the spirits moved in the right direction, that knowledge is important. To teach knowledge to children is still an important thing in the classroom. But that in addition to that, also teaching the students social emotional skills would become a very important topic in the future. So I'm not arguing for social emotional skills alone or exclusively. I always argue for both. It's about learning people to write and read well, Portuguese, math, STEM subjects, sciences, technology, all this is important, but on top, because we are moving to complex societies, also that social emotional skill piece will be an important thing. So we as scientists brought or opened the agenda more, I guess, for evidence-based work, and we were so happy that the Institute actually wanted to invest in this as well. Initially, we were just invited to give our opinions, but then the Institute thought maybe we should give this a little bit more of a permanent character. And this is the next step was the formation of eduLab21, where we brought together a couple of scientists, but as well policy people. And within the Institute there was already a great expertise at that time of people working in the education area. So we had three main pillars represented actually in this kind of combination. So the evidence, that was our agenda, to bring evidence, so the policy people could actually choose and could be better informed to take evidence-based decisions for what they would be implementing. And at the same time, we had the education people in the Institute who actually provide not only an evidence-based perspective, but also a practice-based perspective. So the combination, I found this particularly enriching because I know the empirical approach and the evidence-based approach, but also I got acquainted with the more practice-based approach and the orientation. And I think you need both for the policy people actually, because they need to propose and do stuff in the real world. They need both perspectives, and I found it a wonderful opportunity actually to start with this. Initially, I was very positive about the open-mindedness. When we talked to state secretaries, they were really open already to the topic because they realized that they had to do something, although it was not really clear what they had to do. And then, of course, you can bring in the more evidence-based perspective. And this is what we have, Oliver and myself, have been working on for the OECD, is try to come up with a kind of taxonomy of social emotional skills. For example, the OECD was interested to assess social emotional skills, but what to assess? Do we need to assess collaboration? Do we need to assess creativity? Do we need to assess pieces of emotion regulation? Or do we need to assess a skill like giving a presentation or doing an interview like we are doing right now? So that was the first important thing we had to do, and this is basically what you need to do in almost every science. Every science you will see is investing a lot of resources and a lot of intellectual capacity in building a taxonomy. You have taxonomies in biology, chemistry is using the table of Mendeleev, but we didn't have anything to represent the most important things, a kind of classification scheme for social emotional skills. So if your job is to assess social emotional skills and you are interested in making a comparison across ages or across countries like the OECD would be interested in, first you need to have agreement on a taxonomy on what to assess. So a big chunk of the effort actually of the initial things we did went into that. And when we presented the taxonomy to the politicians here and to state secretary folks, that was an eye-opener for them. An eye-opener in very different respects, because it gave them a little bit of body on otherwise constructs that they are not familiar with. And that was one piece. And the second piece was that you can also assess these. That was really, for many people, including people in my family, they are not psychologists or educational people, and they think, hey, how is it possible to assess something like well-being? Or you have these happiness surveys around the world, and a lot of people are thinking, how can you assess something like happiness? So these two main things were very important, that we came with a kind of taxonomy that actually gave them a couple of ideas what could go into a curriculum. Yeah. And then, of course, if you have a curriculum, the next important step is that you need to be able to examine or to evaluate that what is in the curriculum is also achieved. So that brings in the second piece. It's also very important to be able, in one or another way, to assess what is in the taxonomy. And I found this also, that this initial openness they had to talk to us and to discuss on this, not really knowing what they should do, by giving them a kind of taxonomy that helped them a little bit in terms of stimulating their thinking, what could be necessary in a curriculum. And we have seen the years that were following that there was a lot of discussion on developing a curriculum, the BNCC, and so on and so forth. So when we saw the BNCC initially, we looked at what the BNCC covered and looked at our taxonomy and said, what is missing in the BNCC that is in the taxonomy? And when we looked at it, two main pieces were missing, actually, or were hidden somewhere in the BNCC that we would love to see more explicit, because that's one of the advantages. If you have a taxonomy, you see things in a broader perspective. And two of the things that were missing were actually self-management, everything to do in terms of how you regulate your action, your energy, your ambition. Getting organized, for example, we are scheduled here at 2 o'clock for the interview, so you need to have the setup ready, and until 2, and everyone should be here. That helps in regulating our lives. So the self-management piece, which is a very important one, if we want to train people for the future and for employment, for example, that's a very important piece. But not only for employment, also for in school. If you can learn the students to be more organized, to plan better, to prepare better, not to postpone what they should do. Instead of it's nice weather, you have the options hanging out with your friends or doing your homework first. Well, it's better to do the homework first and then play with your friends than the other way around. So that self-management piece was really lacking in the BNCC. And a second very important piece that was lacking was the entire emotion regulation piece. And this is very important because if we are building something for students, if something is really important in adolescence, that's the entire issue of how people regulate their emotions. It's not only important in adolescence, it's also very important later on. But in adolescence, all these kind of processes are starting at a very intense way. We know puberty with its problems, where people are starting to form their own identities, where they need to tease out how they will relate to their peers, how they look like. The girls are very sensitive on how they look like. All these things come together there. And this is all connected to emotion regulation. So this is a very important piece. So we saw, if we compare the content of the BNCC relative to the taxonomy, we thought, well, it's very important that some self-management stuff and some emotion regulation skills are also part of the BNCC. So I'm illustrating this to show you how actually the empirical basis can inform policy and can actually show to policy people you're missing something. And I think then after all this, the pandemic came in and a bunch of other things. I'm in Belgium, so in Western Europe there's a big fear of a war, a new war, with the problems between Russia and Ukraine and Putin in charge. And so our governments are really watching the situation very, very carefully. So a lot of big challenges came during these 10 years of eduLab that we wouldn't have thought about it at all. Who had expected the pandemic? That all at once came in and that closed schools, close the bars, the hotels, we were not allowed to fly, and so on and so forth. That there would be a war, that we would have all these climate problems, and so big things have happened in these 10 years. And then, of course, it's interesting to see that we already focused on emotion regulation even before the pandemic, and that became a big thing in schools and in the kind of longitudinal work we've been doing with the Institute in Sobral, for example, the longitudinal study there, we really see that emotion regulation is a very important piece, and how people regulate their emotions during the pandemic, that's a very critical piece. So initially people thought regulating emotions, is that an important thing? Well, it turned out during these 10 years that it was. And not only as young people, but also, if I'm looking back, also in Western Europe, well-being in organizations is a very important theme right now. 5 years ago in Belgium, that was not even on the agenda. The businesses were thinking we should be profitable, to keep the shareholders happy. But now it's about being profitable, but also in a sustainable way, that the people are okay, no toxic leaders, and so on and so forth, no dropout, no burnouts, and so on. So this is really that entire emotion regulation piece that is in the taxonomy, that all at once became a very important issue, not only in education, but also in the business world. In addition to the kind of activities, what we do with eduLab, actually, the people here thought that it would be an interesting idea about having a chair at the university where we could prepare some of the initiatives and study them a little bit more at a smaller scale, sometimes more in depth, where we could experiment a little more, and then bring some of these ideas in the kind of work we are doing with eduLab here in Brazil. So we discussed a little bit about what would be the best way to do this, because I'm a university professor and my main job is at the university in Belgium. So one way to deal with this was to actually install an Institute Ayrton Senna chair at Ghent University. So I could have a student, preferably for the initial years, who also talk Portuguese. So the way we organized it is that in 2015 and officially at the beginning of 2016, we started with the Ayrton Senna chair at Ghent University, and they invited me to be the principal investigator on the chair. And that's an interesting construction, because I always have the opportunity to train a PhD student. So initially, that was Gina Pancorbo, whom I met actually during the meeting in 2014. She attended the meeting. At that time she was studying in Brasilia, but was in the delegation of Peru here. And so during the breaks she came to me and said, hey, you're from Belgium, I know people in Belgium. This is also interesting, what is happening here. So if you have an opportunity for me to come to Belgium and make a PhD at your place, that would be wonderful. So when months later Viviane and the people here started talking about the chair, I thought, I know someone who would be optimal for this kind of position. So Gina came to Belgium and made a PhD on a range of more assessment-related projects that we cannot study that intensively here. Sometimes you need to do a little experimentation, and I need to be very close to that to do the supervision of this, and so we started to collaborate very intensively through the chair. And so for my team, already at that time in Ghent, that also created a couple of opportunities because I had access to much broader data and these large data sets that I have never been working before. If you guys do something, well, you immediately think about how to scale it up, and that has advantages, but also some disadvantages. So for really topics that we want to experiment a little more on new approaches, we try to do that at Ghent and then bring this knowledge to here and see if it also works at a broader scale. So this is part of the activities that we do. And then second to this, you guys were also interested in not only in implementing material, but also in distributing this material, making it available at a larger scale. And there's only one way to do it, that's through publishing about everything. Usually if you are in this kind of more political process, it's all very short term and you hop from, it's very demand driven. You get a question, bang, you need to propose something and then they implement 6 weeks later. This is very different in science. In science we can focus for a much longer time on something, work on it, because we want to know the details, we want to learn the processes, we want to learn how things are happening. And at the end we spend sometimes 1, 2, 3 years on writing it up. Now we are focusing on social emotional skills of teachers, and I think we revised the draft, our initial draft on paper 1 maybe already 4 times, because the world is evolving as well, both scientifically as at the level of the OECD, and we really want, if we submit our work, we want to have it the right focus. So that involves a lot of writing and rewriting, and you can do that in an academic institution. Even already there, they will ask you after some time, hey, where are the publications? But if you are interested in making a publication that ends up in a top tier journal, in a high quality journal, that will take you much time. So that's another thing we are doing. We are focusing more on the publication stuff. But that takes years. A big effort is, when you have such a taxonomy at the level of students, is that you need to see it as a kind of framework that they can also use for communication. So the vocabulary is a very important piece on this. How you talk about all these skills, that's important for the students when they talk about their own skills and look at themselves, but it's also very important at the level of teachers. How teachers look at the differences among their students and how they develop their skills. This is really critical. So we invested a big chunk of our time and effort first in getting the vocabulary right and bringing that to the school in the classroom, so the student and the teacher are talking about the same thing. So the vocabulary piece is very important. So that brings in then the problem that the teachers actually got really triggered in terms of looking in a different way to their students. They looked at their students more in terms of differences and in terms of different skill levels that they observe, but that also called their attention to their own social emotional skills. Sometimes teachers are confronted with problems they see in a particular student, and then for them it's always a very critical thing in terms of judging. Does that belong actually to what I have to do as a teacher, or are we actually picking up something that is more for specialists, like a clinical psychologist or the school counselor? So this is one important thing. So I think we need to strengthen teachers first in that, so they feel comfortable in dealing really with the entire social emotional piece to this. Which is not saying that by interacting with the students and with the children, you may come up or you may find issues that have more a clinical kind of nature, but that's for another specialist. Yeah. So people here in Brazil are always talking about educating the whole child, this kind of holistic perspective on education. And I also see that in Western Europe, the idea is that we need to have a holistic focus on education, which is fine. But then I'm asking, on what do you focus in this kind of holistic education? And then we come back to the taxonomy. If you can say it's important to be good in self-management, but also important to be good in making contact with each other, a frequency of social interaction, but also quality of social interaction. And on top, being innovative and being able to regulate your emotions. These are the 5 social emotional skill domains we are focusing on. Then you have the idea of total education operationalized in a tangible way that you can assess and that you can act upon. Otherwise, you are a little bit lost and you do not know exactly what to do. With that system, you see, I need to focus at least on a couple of skills in each of these 5 boxes. Yeah? And then brings you to the question of what is the best way to do that, and are we prepared as teachers to do that? Yeah? And it confronts you with your own skills. If you are having the glasses to look at differences in skills at the level of the students, of course, you're looking at yourself as well, and you think, hey, how I am behaving, and how good am I at these broad skill levels. So that confronts you with your own skill level. So that's the reason why the past years we opened a new box on teacher skills. And if you go into the literature, there is already done a lot, but it's a bits and pieces, a little bit like the skill literature for children. So we brought it all together. So sometimes they call it instructional qualities, but we connected it to the broader skill taxonomy, and I think the kind of taxonomy we have right now is really a kind of applied taxonomy about how teachers behave in the classroom. So we are still busy with examining this further and looking at how that develops. But the idea where we would love to land within a couple of years is that we are in a position actually to inform policy people, again the evidence-based perspective that is coming back here, that we are able to inform policy people on what should go into teacher training in their curriculum. Not in the curriculum for the students, but in the curriculum for teachers and training. How students develop and how social emotional skills in students develop. So that should be a separate piece. So this is one important thing. In addition to that, I also think that the current teacher profession, and that's almost all over the world, not only here in Brazil, but where I live, just the same, we are confronted with getting and attracting enough teachers to the profession. There's a shortage of teachers almost everywhere. Young people starting to study to become a teacher. For example, in Belgium, we see that in the first 5 years, even 20 to 25% leave the job. So that's a big loss, because you're losing people who had the training, and you're losing them during the first years that they are in the profession, and they do something else. And currently we have a shortage of teachers. And then we need to bring in teachers who are already older. What is happening in many places around the world is that they try to make the job of teacher, they try to attract people who had done something very differently before with a kind of quick training. They have 20 years. So for example, my son gets now chemistry from a person who has worked 15 to 20 years in a pharmacy. So she has never been in a teaching position, but she quit there got a basic training in teaching and is coming into the teaching profession at a much older age. And they think in Belgium that this will be a solution, but what we learn from our work here is that also, despite the fact that these people are older in age, because they have been doing another profession before, despite the fact that they are older in age and that they are more mature and more emotionally resilient, even they experience a loss in how they feel emotionally at school, and there's also a risk that they will drop out. Yeah. So this is something we learn from the work we have been doing here today. So the summary is we hope to be in a position to inform the policy people exactly on what to do in these teacher trainings for starting teachers, and then come up with backup programs and programs for the more experienced teachers, so we keep them in the profession. Because here in Brazil, the problem is also having enough teachers, but also do something with the status of teachers, the kind of they feel sometimes undervalued and underrated relative to other jobs. So this is also an important piece. And then the third piece is how to keep people in the job. What can we do to support the teachers who already have 10, 15, 20 years of experience? What can we do to prevent that they drop out? We should not only focus on the young people starting the teacher education training, but we should also take care of those already in the profession, you see? So I think this is one of the main issues of our current agenda. At the level of how people develop, I think, but also later on in your professional life, I think that there are two big questions. Basically two simple questions, but people often forget about this. I call them the what you will do question and the how you will do question. The what you will do question is, in essence, the kind of job you will do, the kind of study major you will choose. Yeah. Some of the guys here around choose to work more with technology, with cameras, with sound and all this kind of stuff. I choose to become and a teacher and a scientist and a consultant, which is more working with people and going to deep level processing of data. So this is the what question. Learning to identify what you want to do. Yeah. And this is a very important one, because people often forget about this. People often think that this is, you're driving around Sao Paulo and you go this direction or you go to another direction. You go, for example, in the direction of Campinas, but you can also drive in the direction of Rio. Yeah? And people often think in terms of making choices that you've chosen a direction, by definition, you need to stay in a particular direction. This does not make sense, because people change, right? And not only people change, but if you develop from an adolescent to a young adult, and then as a young adult into an adult who has his own children, your situation and context is changing as well. So the what question is a very important one, that we give young people and students already the skills to think about how they will navigate in life. You give them a little bit of a compass that helps them in terms of going in one direction, but if you arrive at that point, for example, you have been doing this job for 2 years and you think, this is not really what I want to do my entire life, that you can reorient. So that you have the skills to, open-mindedness is an important one there, which is part of our taxonomy, but also being assertive enough to talk to people and a bunch of other things. So that's the what question. So for that, objective, we worked on, and we are using the RIASAC model, which is basically developed by John Holland. And actually, I made my PhD in 1996 on the Holland model, so I know that area pretty well. And I've been working my entire life in this area, and this is a very important core, what people will do. And in addition to that, you have the how question, where you learn to figure out how you perform and what your strengths are. Most of us are usually good in 3 or 4 things. We cannot be good in all. That's a stupid idea. This is not realistic, but it's very important to know in life how you perform, what your strengths are, also what your developmental points are. That gives you a little bit of room in terms of improving or adapting better to the kind of level which is required in a certain context. So the social emotional skill piece is really about the how question. An interaction between abilities and personality that help you in performing. But the context in which you perform is also an important one. You can have 2 people who have the same skill set, but the one is performing in the field of medicine, for example, and the other one is performing more in the social field as a teacher. Wow, there will be already a salary difference. You have people with more or less the same skill set, for example, but depending on the area in which you are working, you will find more or less easy a job, or there will be salary differences and so on and so forth. So I think this is really critical, that we help people in terms of thinking about the what question, what you will do, and how you will do it. And this is very, very important, I guess, for younger people, the what question, because the younger people often just have a very narrow scope on what they can do and what the options and the possibilities are. I can speak for myself because I'm coming from a lower class family. My father worked as a laborer in industry, and my mother was a housemaid for the rich people. Yeah, and so I didn't have much opportunities to get into contact with people of the more high jobs and interesting jobs and more educated jobs. And I think it's very, very important that we learn, actually, students, also from disadvantaged groups. We are always talking that education is very important to overcome social inequality. I think the what question is also it's an underrated one. You see often that people are making choices in terms of what their parents are doing for jobs. Do a survey in the medical faculty and you will see that a lot of people who study in the medical faculty have a parent or at least a relative who is a doctor as well, or a physician as well. So it's really important to open up this kind of perspective on the what question also for young students. I think this is really the next step that we need to do. From people from disadvantaged backgrounds, that could be socio-economically, but also in the country where I live, immigrant people, and so on and so forth. So at least they see much, much broader opportunities, also in the long run in their careers. I'm doing a lot of work for adults as well, and if you talk to people who lost their job, the critical piece is always, what should I do next? And then you start talking to them, and you need to help them on the how question. They will always say, oh yeah, I worked as an engineer in company A. Stop. And then you need to ask, hey, what did you do there in terms of skills? So that's the how question. And then you need to ask them, hey, what is next? What will you do next? And then they only think in terms of the previous job they have done or the previous education they got. And this is driving around Sao Paulo. They went to Campinas and they are still thinking that the next work will be in the Campinas direction or in the Rio direction. Whereas if you give them the broader scope on what they can do, they may go from the Campinas direction into the Rio direction, or the other way around. And I think that's a very important piece. Not only focus on the how question, this is what we did with the Institute and with eduLab for the past 7-8 years, but the last years we focused as well on the what question, and I'm very happy. This is probably the ideal world, but if you start working on that, and if you give young people a vocabulary so they can better look at themselves, they can better look in which areas they can shine and which areas are a little underdeveloped, that's a life changer. Often think about boys in puberty. They are completely clueless and do not know how to behave. They just want to hang out with friends, but they have their emotions as well. And so if you can help them with better identifying what is going on, that is so important, and that keeps them in the system rather than dropping out. And here in Brazil, that's a major concern. And if you lose the children, to every state secretary I've been talking to the past 10 years, that's usually their first question. How can we prevent burnout? That's a critical dropout, excuse me. That's a very, very important one, because if you lose them, you do not have any impact on them anymore. If they don't show up in the school, you lose them. And then where are they? And they come into reality, they come into contact with the gang, etc. and so on and so forth. So all effort that you can do in making a school an attractive and a safe place, and a place where they also, that they don't find it boring. That initially, sometimes they think this is boring stuff. But once they engage with it, they see that it helps them to explore and think about themselves. That's a very important piece. And it also helps them to build better connections with their peer group and with their friends. So we are not only focusing on learning them the vocabulary, but the second piece is that we also try to give them real life problems that may happen to them, and then learn how to decompose actually a problem in terms of skills to handle it. If it's about bullying, well, we learned that this is all for being the victim of bullying or being the witness of bullying. This is very, very different, but if you want to roll out a program on bullying, well, if you think in terms of our skill box, well, this is basically about you have a bully, you have a victim, you have bystanders of the bully, and then you have a couple of witnesses. So what needs to happen is that the students who are witnessing the bullying problem, they need to realize this is not, they need first to have empathy with the victim, because they have to think, oh, if he or she is the victim, I might be the next one. So that's an empathy exercise. That's in our toolbox. The second piece is that it's about respect. That those who are witnessing it are saying, hey, this is not what we agreed upon. How to deal with each other here, how to live together. This is not what we want. So empathy, respect. And the third piece to solve the problem is really assertiveness. Some of the people who witness it have to stand up, have to speak up, and have to come in between the victim and the bully and say this has to stop, or go to the teacher, and so all of us together can work and discuss on this. So a problem that is happening frequently, decompose the problem in terms of 3 skills you need to learn and you need to work on in solving it and creating a better school environment, a better school climate. Another problem that is often happening, young girls touched by other young males inappropriately. How to say no to this? Or when a gang is approaching you and is asking you to bring something, you're going every day to school out of this area of the city, why you do not work for us and deliver something? How to say no to this kind of pressure? This involves, again, a couple of different skills. So it's not only about having the vocabulary, but it's also about learning students how to work from a problem, think around a problem, and think about solutions. The how of performance, how I deal with this, given the skills that we learned. The same for dropout. If all the students are observing, hey, Ricardo is not coming anymore, or Andreas is already home for a couple of days, we do not see him anymore in the classroom, that the other friends who are living in the neighborhood actually can go to Andreas and say, hey, where are you? We need you there. We are busy with this, we are busy with that, so it's not only about, that's always the first step, having the vocabulary to talk about it, but then the action piece comes in, really the how question. How do we do it? How do we perform? And this is what we also try to learn in some of the programs, but starting from very specific problems, bullying, inappropriate behavior, learning how to better focus, a big problem for many students. And often it's not their fault. If you are living in a household with 4 people together, 4 young people and 1 or 2 parents, and you have limited space, you have a corner like this, and everything has to happen in this small corner. Preparing the food, 2 or 3 people having to do homework, and in the evening you sleep in this specific environment. How will you organize yourself? How will you focus on your homework or on a lesson to learn, and so on and so forth. So it's really also starting from particular problems, how to deal with it. And I think this is very important, and actually is much bigger than only the school context. Of course, a policy person is always thinking, what can I do at the level of the school? But I think if you are working on the social emotional skill agenda, this learns them a lot of things that they will also use in their peer group and that they will also use in the home environment. And these are really the 3 contexts that are important for young people. At the level of an adult, that's your job, but at the level of a student, that's the school. A more organized set of activities with expectations, rules to follow, expectations to be met, and so on and so forth. That's important. The peer group, that learns you all a very different set of skills. That's really the area where you need to practice a lot of self-management and empathy, how to connect with others, not to get involved with the wrong people, learn on whom you can rely on when you're in difficulty or when you're feeling sad. So this is all very, very important. The peer group, the school context, but also the home situation. So I'm very happy that through all this we could help, and I think the Institute picked it up very nicely during the pandemic. We were all stuck, and we did not know how to reach out to students because we are used to work in the school context, but schools were closed, and then of course through the internet, and because we already had this kind of social emotional skill agenda, we could design very small information pieces and small interventions to reach them. And I think that was also a very important thing, that we could do this in a much better way, to help the people who are actually in their home environments disconnected from everything. I think especially the data showed that to us. The girls had a hard time. I think this is such an important legacy. I knew the name Senna, of course, and still today, a lot of people know the name Senna in Belgium. To give you an example, I bought this T-shirt, I think 7 weeks ago on the internet, and I was wearing it the day after that it arrived and came into a Belgian restaurant, and someone said, "Hey, that's that new Senna logo." Just to give you an illustration that what is important here, of course, and if I'm arriving at Grue Airport and I say to the taxi driver, bring me to the city center, and he or she is asking me, what are you doing here? And if I'm saying I'm working and connected to the Ayrton Senna Institute, well, you see excitement in the people. And then you drive on the Ayrton Senna highway from Grue Airport up to the city center, and you see it announced already. And so I think through being here and by talking to a lot of people, I can see that Senna's legacy is really very, very important here. Yesterday we participated at the race as well, and 10,000 people all celebrating and buying into this agenda. I think this is very, very impressive, and actually for me it's an honor to participate in all this because I found it very, very important to be able to do this because it has a tremendous applied value. I can spend my time writing papers, which I have been doing my entire career, but the production of papers is now slowing down. But through the work I'm doing here, we have much, much more impact on real people, I would say. Scientific work has its merits and has its impact, but by working here, I think we have a very different form of impact. And luckily, that's also much, much more appreciated by universities nowadays. When I applied for a job initially, it was all about publications. Today, it's not only about publications, but also on what you do with your research and having what we would call societal impact. So I think at the scale level, we can have impact in Brazil. If the MySkills program is reaching hundreds of thousands of children, I can only be very proud of that. That with the group we did this. And at the same time, I'm very proud not only about the work itself, but also that we were able to continue on this for 10 years already. Yeah. In all honesty, from hindsight, if I would have known that we would be able to work together for 10 years, I would have studied Portuguese. Actually, the person who is now working at the chair in Ghent, she is a Belgian, Joyce Scherlings, but she is studying Portuguese. And so this is amazing because I've doing research jobs my entire career, but this is really a 10-year slot, which is so important because it helps you in overviewing what you have been doing. If you're working as a consultant for some other thing, that takes 1 year or 2 years, and then it's done, and you're up or you move to something else. But here we had the opportunity, and I think Viviane got it right to pick a couple of people that would work together also for this long period. That's also quite exceptional. Usually, if you have people working together, that usually takes, also in academia, it usually takes 2, 3, 4 years, and then due to all different sorts of difficulties or egos, they split up in one or another way. We've been working as the Dorf already in a very productive way for 10 years, I guess, and learned a lot from each other. Things I learned is that one of the Dorfs, the D of the Dorfs is Daniel, who is an economist, and he learned me so much about Brazil, about education in Brazil, but also about how an economist is thinking about all this. And so I think it's a very nice combination of bringing scientific people together representing different disciplines, also the policy people attached to that have their struggles and informing us about what could be done and what the real demands were. And then from the institute, the inside of the institute, having the perspective of the education people. I think that made my professional life not only more exciting, but really much more interesting. And I got so much of all this. And it's really an honor to do this under the header of the figure of Senna, who is for many of the Brazilians a real hero. And yesterday, watching television on the Senna Day, I saw Fittipaldi on television. So these were names I completely forgot. I forgot completely, and I was sitting a little tired already in my bed watching television, and I saw these people and I thought, oh yeah. So, but Senna is well known, of course, in Belgium, because Belgium is such a small country. In the Francophone part of the country, we have Francorchamps, which is the race circuit over there. And if you go to the museum attached to Francorchamps, there's a separate corner with all Senna pictures and so on and so forth. Also the secretary at my department, she and her husband are big Formula One fans. And when she came to work with us, she was surprised to see all at once Institute Ayrton Senna chair. What is this? So she came and knocked on my door and said, hey Philip, can you explain me a little bit what your connection is to Senna? And I'm advertising about you guys all the time because we do a lot of Zoom and Teams meetings, and when we installed the chair at Ghent, Viviane brought me a big helmet, one of these nice helmets, and the helmet is behind me. It has a special place in my office, and when the camera is on me for a Teams meeting, people are watching the helmet, and it's all often people are saying, hey, what is your connection to this? Not because they think that I'm driving myself or whatever, but this is certainly not true. So, all in all, I think this has been a wonderful investment. With a great outcome, with hopefully a great outcome for all the people in the programs, but also I found it very rewarding. Also to know the Institute, people in the Institute, to know the Brazilians. And if I'm coming 10 years here, that's the money that I like it here.
Yes.
Otherwise I wouldn't show up again.